Welcome to Transmissions from the Transgender Battleground. I'm CatLady762. This is part 2 of my response to the WeSpa incident. Specifically, this video talks about the politicalization of trans bodies. A different trans YouTuber, in a response that I watched, claimed that incidents like WeSpa were being used by the gender critical movement to politicize trans bodies. Now, I find that somewhat funny because I, for one, don't feel like the gender critical is really that organized of a movement. It is, from what I see, mostly a bunch of women with some allies like myself trying to have a conversation about trans ideology and specifically how the policies that are being enacted based on that ideology are having impacts on females and children especially. Now, in order to discuss the politicalization of trans bodies, we would have to be able to define what is a trans body. I have no doubt that the YouTuber that I watched, and most people in the trans community, would define a trans body as anybody that belongs to somebody who identifies as transgender. That's not my definition. My definition of a trans body is the body of somebody who has altered it medically through hormones and or surgery to take on the external characteristics that are more commonly associated with the opposite sex. I have a trans body. Buck Angel has a trans body. YouTubers Blair White and Jamie Dodger have trans bodies. Our bodies look considerably different from the standard of our biological sex. If you take Blair and myself and line us up naked with 1,000 other males, we are going to stand out. Same thing will happen if you do that for Buck and Jamie and 1,000 other females. Now, the politicalization of trans bodies is absolutely a thing. It's been a thing pretty much since as long as there have been policies enacted by governments or organizations or private entities that regulate the treatment of trans people. Most of those policies, whether you agree with them or not, when they were enacted, were at least in good measure pertaining to our bodies. There's a reason why the initial policies that allowed trans people to legally change our sex required medical transition and usually full sexual reassignment surgery before that was allowed. The argument was basically, my body is more like this than like that, therefore you should treat me as this. Because let's not pretend that governments are benevolent. No one is sitting around going, we should let a very small number of one sex group legally be recognized as the other sex group because it will make them happy. This was done because there was seen as some societal benefit to allowing the change. Now, the politicalization of trans bodies is still going on, but it's not being done really by the gender critical. It's being done by trans rights activists themselves. Specifically, the politicalization of transsexual bodies. Anytime somebody makes the argument, well, if you want males to use men's spaces, then that means that trans men like Buck Angel have to use female spaces, and they post a picture of his body. they are politicizing a transsexual body. Anytime that the issue of trans people in prison come up, the argument is usually, well, trans women are at risk in male prisons. Well, let's look at that. What arguably puts a trans woman at higher risk in a male prison? Is it my identity, whatever the heck that is, which no one can see, no one would know? There's no external, notification of what such identity, if it even exists, would be. So I don't think it's that. Nor do I think it's my pronouns. You could potentially argue, well, cat lady, you are more feminine in appearance and demeanor than most males. Possibly. But there are also plenty of other males that are a lot more feminine in appearance and demeanor than I am. Do we automatically say that all males that are deemed a sufficient level of feminine should be in female spaces? No, I don't think so. Arguably, what would put me at considerably higher risk than other males in that space would be my body. My body that, at least externally and superficially, looks more similar to a typical female body that could potentially be seen as sexually desirable to a population who does not have access to actual female bodies. My body that I cannot, for all intents and purposes at this point, suddenly take off or exchange or make appear less typically female. That would be what would potentially put me at higher risk. But of course, when the activists are talking about it, my body itself is not supposed to play a role. Now, keep in mind that I am not advocating at this point that my body should put me in a female prison. I'm just making the argument that that is a possible compelling argument for higher risk than identity. But transsexual bodies, despite the fact that transsexuals ourselves and even medical transition are seen as dirty concepts for the trans cult, as I like to call them, we're not the only ones that trans rights activists like to politicize. They have no problem politicizing intersex bodies. That's how we get the concept of sex is a spectrum. They have no problem politicizing female bodies. They do it all the time when they say things like, well, are infertile women not women? Are women without uteruses not women? They're politicizing aspects of female biological conditions to try and get you to believe that some males also meet those conditions and so therefore should be considered women. And they absolutely politicize children's bodies by the push to medically transition children. So yes, the politicalization of trans bodies is a thing. But it's trans activists that are making it a thing and keeping it a thing. So Did the Wii Spa incident politicize trans bodies? In a way. I think it brought awareness to the fact that trans bodies are not necessarily what most people think they are when the concept comes up. I would wager that most people think of post-op transsexuals. I spent a long time arguing when I was more on the trans rights activist side that no trans woman would do this. I was proven wrong. Our bodies do matter. And there are things that, we need to take into consideration pertaining to our sexed bodies. But the activists don't want you to do that because it actually acknowledges that sexed bodies are different. So again, who is really politicizing our bodies? If you like this video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. I appreciate it.